Every fire has the potential to be a killer.
I turned around and everything was orange.
It was just really coming down on us.
Nobody had any idea the amount of fire that would be coming up out of that hill.
I was under a wave of fire.
And I was just hoping that I could outrun it. It was sheer panic.
This one was so small, it didn't even appear fun. It was just basically going to be a little 2-hour chore and back to the work center. And it was a day much like today.
Timber Weller, a Florida firefighter, was in his work center when a call came in. Someone reported seeing flames in the woods near some homes.
It was really a pretty nondescript, low-activity fire. I reported to the dispatch center that I would, I could handle it without backup.
In Florida, it wasn't uncommon for a single tractor plow to be called in to control a small wildfire. Weller sized up what seemed to be a perfectly routine fire and began plowing a fire line.
I hadn't been operating the tractor perhaps 5 minutes on the fire when I noticed the flame length began to increase and the fire really started to kick up. That wasn't particularly unusual for a fire to flare up and drop back down, but this one never dropped back down.
Things began to go wrong, fast.
And within a matter of seconds, the sky above me had already turned orange. My first thought was, you can't do that. I mean, a little 2-foot flame in turkey oak fuel does not ignite the crowns of pine trees. It simply doesn't happen.
But it did happen. A downdraft had struck, driving the flames 50 feet high and towards Weller at an extremely high rate of speed. He turned his tractor and made a run for it.
The fire was moving so fast that almost as soon as I lifted the plow, the flames were already coming over the treetops above me.
When it became apparent that he couldn't outrun it, Weller looked for a clear spot to deploy his shelter, but he couldn't find one. His instincts then told him to run. His training, however, told him to stay put, that he'd be running right into the hot zone. Instead, Timber huddled into his cab, covered his face, and did the one thing that saved his life.
I took a deep breath as the fire was getting ready to hit me, and because the fire was moving so fast, I was able to hold that breath long enough that the superheated gases had mostly passed by the time I inhaled again.
Doctors gave him no chance to live. 13 surgeries later, he did survive.
When someone's burned to the degree that I was, the 70%, they generally lose their ears, their nose, their eyebrows, fingers, arms. I mean, I really didn't lose that much. I mean, a lot of skin, but none of the digits or appendages or anything like that. So for the amount of injury that I sustained, actually, I came out of it pretty well.
Even the most routine fire can go horribly wrong. Accidents can happen at any moment. Firefighters have a job to do, but that doesn't mean they have to endanger their lives recklessly. Everyone has to take responsibility for his or her own safety and accept that fire is dynamic and can kill in a heartbeat.
Overcome the idea that it can't happen to you. You have to believe that it can't happen to you in order to get up and go to work every morning. But you also have to make a rational decision to accept that it may. It's happened to other people. It happens almost every year. People get burned over or killed. So again, it's an inherently dangerous business. If you keep fighting fire long enough, you're going to get into a sticky situation eventually. So convince yourself that it can happen to you and then train from that perspective.
Because Weller attempted to contain the fire alone, he was unable to employ some of the fundamental safety rules of LCES. A lookout watches for sudden changes in the weather or the fire's behavior. Maintaining clear, open communications is critical for alerting firefighters when changes occur. Pre-established escape routes provide a quick way out when things go wrong. and a reachable safety zone gives the firefighter a place to wait out the blaze. If Timber Weller had been able to implement LCES, the outcome may have been different. In Dowd's Landing in Northern California, a crew knew a fire was coming, had time to prepare, and it still went wrong. The crew was called to protect a house situated above a fire burning near the Stanislaus River.
I was exhilarated that we were going to be fighting some fire, and some good fire at that. I still didn't know what was going to be in store as far as the amount of fire.
The crew had mitigated the structure several days before. Now they held a meeting and set up a lookout and reconfirmed their escape routes and safety zone. Their game plan was to let the fire blow by while they protected the structure. What wasn't in the game plan was how fast and how much fire was coming. As the fire approached, their safety captain called out spots.
I could see the fire starting to build below us. I stood on the deck and called it off in about 1,000-foot increments as it came up.
First it was one spot, and then it was 5 spots, and then the whole thing was on fire. It went from having a few seconds to spare to no time at all.
I was standing in the driveway next to the engine. I turned around and everything was orange and realized that we were now experiencing area ignition.
I didn't have time to be scared. There was just entirely too much to do.
It was burning my ears and my nose through my protective equipment.
And numerous spot fires everywhere. On the structure, in the litter around the structure, and the trees above the structure started to go. And then spot fires, which pretty much closed off our escape route.
The crew had designated an escape route that ran down the driveway past a propane tank. Spot fires soon heated up the tank.
All of a sudden I hear this jet engine firing up. And I come towards the front of the house to find out what it is and realize it's the propane tank.
It sounded as though you were at the airport standing next to the jet. It was that loud.
The propane tank began venting its gas, shooting flames high into the air. Their escape route was blocked. Propane tanks are just one of many man-made hazards that complicate work in the interface and must be figured into safety decision-making. Electrical power lines might fall during a fire and also block escape routes, or ignite engines parked beneath them. Common residential materials like vinyl siding and tar roofing, and everyday chemicals such as pesticides can generate highly toxic smoke if involved in a fire. These hazards can be found everywhere, behind the house, in sheds, fences, garages, even dog houses. And in crowded residential areas, the danger increases exponentially. The venting propane tank was only the beginning of the crew's problems. Their water supply ran out, used up trying to cool the propane tank. With their escape route blocked, the crew intended to take refuge in the engine, but they had parked it next to a flammable fence, and it caught fire.
If you've ever heard an engine burn, once the radios start going, the sirens start going, and it makes this god-awful sound, the poor animal is dying. To hear that thing crying its last breath and not being able to save it, that's probably something that I'll carry with me for a long time.
The crew maintained good communications between themselves, but outside communications became compromised due to the lack of common frequencies and overloading of the command frequency. Their options were running out fast.
It's more than just the engine being out of waters. Now what are we going to do?
I explained it as like playing a game of cards, and I just kept dropping the cards out of my hand and couldn't pick them up.
I was starting to question my own safety.
The only option was to make the house their safety zone and defend it any way they could. In most cases, entering a vulnerable or burning structure is not a recommended interface tactic. However, not saving a home contradicts what most firefighters instinctually feel to be their duty. Most firefighters want to save every home, often causing them to take risks they shouldn't take. Sometimes you have to abandon someone's burning home. While it may be hard to do this, no home is worth jeopardizing your life to save it. In the case of Dowd's Landing, protecting a vulnerable home put the crew at risk. Ironically, the structure became their last-ditch safety zone.
having a little trouble breathing. Everybody was. But you can't take time out for that because there's other stuff going on. The structure's burning, you know, forget about breathing, go put the structure out.
Our only way of getting out was keeping that house standing. That was the only thing that was going to keep us alive.
With their water gone, they improvised ways to extinguish the spotting.
We were now throwing cases of Gatorade and water onto the roof to pour it on anything that was burning.
The deck is on fire. Somebody run out and stomp it out. The roof is on fire. Somebody go out and tear off a roof tile.
For 3 hours, the crew put out spot fires. They were lucky. All of them escaped without injuries.
The end result was the house still stands and the engine was gutted.
The crew had implemented LCES, but things still went wrong. Was it because firefighting in the interface is inherently more complicated? What could have been done differently to change the outcome?
I still see those flames in my mind standing here today. It's hard to describe to other people how big this fire was and how fast this fire was moving.
In the Cerro Grande region of New Mexico, a fire threatened the lives of Captain Robert Stibbard's crew. Their engine had been called in to help protect a threatened neighborhood.